Hello and welcome to the second of our digital roadshows. It's good to have so many people with us from all around the world. And this time we're looking at the associate distinction, quite a step up from licentiate, because for this we assume you know the basics of how to use your camera, how to control light and shutter speed, and how to communicate through your photography. So it's a notch up all round. And we now start looking for the beginnings of a personal style. The main difference is that instead of asking for images, 10 images, as in licentiate, which can of course be entirely unrelated, here we're looking for a body of work consisting of 15 images with a definite theme. And we have various genres: travel, fine art, contemporary, documentary, applied, natural history, film and multimedia, and landscape. Now we won't be dealing with film this time, and the landscape panel hasn't yet met, but all the others will be featured. So let's start then, the associate criteria, which applies to all genres. And it says this: a statement of intent that defines the purpose of the work, identifying its aims and objectives, a cohesive body of work that depicts and communicates those aims and objectives as set out in the statement of intent, a body of work that communicates an individual's vision and understanding, a high level of technical ability using techniques and photographic practices appropriate to the subject, and an appropriate and high level of understanding of craft and artistic presentation. So let's begin with our first genre, which is applied. Each genre has its own guidelines, so the trick is to find the one that suits your work best. Help is available, of course, which we'll get to later. But let's start with the applied genre and meet the panel chair, Trevor Yerbury, FRPS. Hello, Trevor, come in from Scotland.
Good morning, Peter. How are you? Are you well?
Fine, thank you. You all right?
Yeah, yes, good to see you.
Now, we do have the odd question. What is applied photography? How would you describe it?
Well, I suppose applied photography really is photography that's done with an end purpose in mind. It has to have a use, whether it's an exhibition, whether it's a book, whether it's commissioned by a newspaper, magazine, but it has to have some kind of defined purpose.
Could it be, say, a community project which ends up on the walls of a community hall or something like that?
It covers such a broad spectrum of work, Peter. I mean, it could be anything. It could be, you know, a motorcycle meeting where the images are used in a magazine, as you say. It could be a community, whether they're used as a brochure. Anything goes as long as it has a defined end usage.
You don't have to be a professional, for example.
No, good grief, no. Many examples of excellent applied panels have been by enthusiasts.
So what sort of people have you had apply in the past?
Well, we've had everybody. I mean, we have had obviously professionals because there is definitely end use for their work, but many of the enthusiast applied panels have come from a broad range of work from not only the UK but around the world.
Now, with all associate submissions, we need a statement of intent. What is it for and why is it so important?
I think the statement of intent is very important. I think it has to be concise, well written, but stick to the brief of what the subject of what the body of work is all about. It should communicate what the author has set out to do, clearly, concisely, without going off on tangents, but just keep it to the point, but describe exactly why they've completed this body of work. So
the images must reflect what you say in your statement?
Yes, I think panel members are very keen to ensure that the statement of intent marries with the images.
So don't put words in you can't justify.
Absolutely not. No.
Okay, well, Trevor, why don't we look at one of the successful panels from 2020? And this is very topical because it's all about COVID-19, and yes. It comes from Annabelle Chi, ARPS, and yeah. I'll now read her statement of intent. And she says, when the COVID-19 virus outbreak started in Wuhan, some experts predicted that Taiwan would have the highest number of cases outside China. But because of the hard lessons Taiwan learned during the SARS epidemic, the COVID-19 infection has largely spared my home country despite its proximity to China. Unfortunately, the situation is quite well under control so far, and I'm able to move around and capture the images of ordinary life during these very dark times. I'm a photographer for a news magazine in Taiwan, and my intent with this portfolio of images is to prepare for a future story with emphasis on the public events and transportation hubs, showing how daily life in these places are impacted under the shadow of the COVID-19 virus. Well, let's look at the images individually now. Trevor, what did you think of this panel?
Well, I think firstly, Peter, that the statement of intent is really one of the best I've ever seen. It was concise, to the point. It conveyed all the information that the panel members required. And the panel itself, as you said, was very interesting and very current. I particularly like image number 2, which just shows you I mean, she talks about transportation and just shows you the chaos that has been caused by COVID-19, and this fleeting figure rushing past, obviously perhaps with a flight cancelled, but this is a great example of the panel. And
Annabelle, of course, if we move on now, is a photojournalist, so that's the sort of image and that'll be very, very useful in her magazine.
I think so. This one in particular, I'm not quite, I was examining this image, I'm not quite sure, but she's obviously carrying testing kits and around her waist. But again, it shows you the atmosphere of the events and obviously the testing that is going on in Taiwan.
I think the key word you used there was atmosphere. I mean, it reeks atmosphere, doesn't it, this panel?
Well, this one, yeah, and that certainly reeks atmosphere. But the next image, which we just saw, really, I found this one incredibly interesting. I mean, we don't know definitively where the virus started, but here we have all the raw meat hanging up. The lady in question is buying her raw meat with her mask on, and yet she's taking change from the gentleman behind the counter who's obviously been handling the raw meat in her bare hands. So it's a real contradiction. Well spotted by the photographer.
Okay, next one, there we go.
Again, the atmosphere, again, it's an event, but again, some people masked up, many not masked up, but again, it just shows you the atmosphere of the event under COVID. And again, I mean, I wasn't sure this could be a boardroom, this could be a hotel bedroom, suite, whatever, but again, just showing you how the effect that this has had upon the human race, and where everything is now being disinfected to the nth degree. Again, interesting juxtaposition, well positioned in the frame, bottom left-hand corner, a very interesting and intriguing image. And again, something, you know, again, well spotted, something you don't normally consider on a train, the amount of effort that goes into cleansing and deep cleansing a train, especially under current situation. And again, you know, this is, in creating this story, she's captured various elements. And I think this is an important part of that story. Father and son, dad on his phone, obviously, a boy wearing a mask incorrectly under the nose, but again, it's an interesting juxtaposition of the two of them. And I love the look in this young man's face. It's almost fear, perhaps because he's wearing such a heavily filtered mask, but intriguing image. And again, a value part. And this one, again, I found, if you actually look closely at this image, Peter, you will see that the gentleman, I think this is probably a train station or an airport, but at the screen he is looking at are obviously where passengers would normally be queuing up to travel, and the lines are all empty of people, showing the effect that we've got or have. I found this one very interesting. Again, the confidence, health, care and respect. Annabelle must have waited just for the right moment. This is such an important part of creating a story, is waiting finding where you want to photograph the image, and then waiting for the right moment for the right people to pass by. Who knows how long she waited here, but she certainly captured a fabulous image. And again, the we care sign takes predominance in this image. Some people with masks, many without masks. It looks as if it's some kind of event, obviously. Hard to tell what it is, but again, I think the we care is the message that she's trying to put across.
And the chap on the left with a yellow headband, I mean, it's an interesting face, isn't it?
Yes, it's a face you would like to photograph, Peter. And again, this is reminiscent of the, I just see the Vietnam, you know the image, Peter. And I know this is obviously a temperature testing gun, but it's very similar to that image that, again, yeah, well seen. And again, part of the story. And this perhaps was in a way, my favorite image, although it's gray. It lacks feeling, it lacks emotion. It's an elderly couple on a train. They're so washed out, the color is gone, and yet they're looking out to a bright blue sky. Is this the bright blue sky of tomorrow? Is this what we're going towards? Is this hope? Who knows? But it's a great way to end the panel.
In a way, this was a perfect panel because each image tells a story and it all adds up to the overall narrative. I think you can tell there's a photojournalist at work here.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think everybody on the panel was blown away by the storytelling of the panel, how cohesive it was as a panel. The objectives that she mentioned in her statement of intent have all been met. And it flowed beautifully, and it captured so many different elements of life in Taiwan under COVID-19.
Okay, let's come off this hanging plan now, because we were hoping at this point Annabelle could join us to talk about her panel, but she's just arrived on an island off Taiwan to discover mobile phone coverage is not strong enough for a chat. So the trials and tribulations of a photojournalist, but a lovely panel. And Trevor Yerbury, FRPS, thank you very much indeed for talking about it. We'll come back to you later.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So now let's move on to fine art and bring in the chair of the fine art panel, Sue Brown, FRPS. Hello, Sue, are you there?
I'm here, thank you.
Excellent, excellent. Now, fine art is used by many people about different types of photography. What do we mean by fine art?
Well, fine art is certainly looking for a creative eye, but when we're talking about creativity, we're not necessarily talking about creativity within Photoshop. We're talking about somebody with that photographer's eye that can communicate something with an attention to detail.
So the definition we have, photography which communicates a creative vision, means you are really looking for the photographer to do something, probably in camera more than anything else, but to create something that is theirs.
Absolutely, but not necessarily in camera. People think often mistakenly, that by creative photography we mean things that have had a lot of Photoshop done. That is not the case, although we do get a lot which have had a lot of Photoshop done, which obviously has to be appropriate to the subject matter that they're using.
But you do allow any manipulation, don't you, as long as it,
yes, we do. There are no guidelines. You can do what you like as long as it communicates a creative vision and communicates to us.
So what makes a successful fine art panel, would you say?
An attention to detail with such things as composition, lighting. Lighting can be very important. And it's making sure that also the statement of intent is important. We're not interested in how it was done, but why, what the motivation was, and what the photographer is trying to communicate to us. It is the image that is important. We do expect good technical standards. If there is a technical problem that spoils the imagery, then obviously it will fail. But we're not fussing over occasional blown highlights or lack of shadow detail. unless it is important to the picture.
So the content could overrule that.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Well, why don't we look through now one of the successful submissions, which comes from Nigel Dutt, ARPS, who built a highly unusual house in Devon. And first, because I think it'll be interesting, let's look at a video of the house. Then we'll see the images from Nigel's panel. And you might be surprised, some people. So let's have a look at that video. If you turn up the sound, Simon, there should be someone here. Can't hear any sound, but it's a house not that far from Exeter. Quite minimalist, as you see. And Nigel planned this with his wife and the architect to make a rather extraordinary house, which is up for an award actually in a design competition. So, and here is Nigel's hanging plan. Now, I wonder how many people could get an image like this from a house like that. Let me read you Nigel's statement of intent. We recently built a contemporary and quite minimalist house, working with our architects on the design, which makes much use of natural materials such as clay, plaster and wood. When we moved in, I was at first surprised and then delighted and fascinated by the drama of the light and shade produced by both natural light and the house's inbuilt lighting. I then became immersed in capturing the lighting effects within the house, sometimes augmented by light from the reflection pool outside. My panel is intended to show the way the light dances around me in the high contrast, monochromatic way that it presents itself, making small details become the point of focus and de-emphasizing the building materials to achieve semi-abstracted designs, while at the same time conveying something of the feel of the house, centered as it is on the internal courtyard. So if we go through these images, Sue, what's caught your attention about this panel?
I think what caught my attention was that, unlike Applied, each individual image doesn't need to say anything on its own. It is a body of work that has been designed beautifully, as has the house, to come together as one image as a whole. So each image is very much a graphic design, lots of triangles, squares, shapes, dappled light, and everything about it has sort of come together as a graphic image as a whole.
So with fine art, the overall impression of all the images is rather more important than some other genres.
It is certainly as important, and in some cases, in this one, it has become very important. This one I asked to stop on for a moment because it is the only image that has an artifact in it, as you can see the head here of the sculpture. And this is the central image, and everything else comes round it and focuses on. Obviously, Nigel has a very artistic eye with the collection of artworks he has, as well as the design of the building. So a very good central image to have something that is different from the others.
Okay, let's carry on. How unusual is it to have an architectural theme in fine art?
It's not unusual at all, but this one is unusual. I mean, the simplicity of some of these images, there is very little in them. It is just the shapes, but when you see them as a whole, the way they join together and form the house, and that one, just the light coming through, all about light and shade, not a lot of detail in the blacks there, you don't need them, just the light from the Venetian blind shining across the floor, giving you that design. And then we've got the curves coming in here, which add a bit of different drama to it, which then moved on so well to the next one with the curves and the slightly soft focus of the straight lines at the, in the center. And again, very simplistic, lots of blacks with no detail, doesn't matter, there's no interest in them. The interest is in the light. And again, the light coming down the passageway, leading us into a room through the doorway. So all about light, shade, and drama. And when you look at it as a whole, that really comes together. You can see particularly images 12 and 13, they almost join together as one image. An unusual layout with the 4 at the top, and then the 5, which gives you a natural central image, and then the bottom row, where there isn't a central image as such, but 12 and 13 join together as if they are. So the layout is absolutely superb, and the whole body of work comes together as one graphic design on its own.
Having got all the images, it must have been quite difficult to end up with the right hanging plan.
I think Nigel found that quite a challenge. He had quite a lot of images that he didn't use because he kept changing them and moving them around. And eventually he came up with this one, which I think was probably a perfect example of a hanging plan for a print panel.
Well, let's not speculate. Let's ask the man himself, because Nigel Dutt, ARPS, can join us now. Hello, Nigel.
Hello, Peter.
So why don't you tell us, having got the images, how much trouble did you have putting this panel together?
I think it was more of a learning experience about the importance of the panel. And I actually ended up consciously making the panel architectural in the same way as you put together a building. So that I ended up going high to low in terms of where I took the pictures in the building, light to dark, and then trying to get a balance. And as Sue pointed out, it was the central image was important, because if you see the architect's statement of design, statement about how she designed the house, she describes it as a series of rooms built around a courtyard. So that's why I deliberately had that slightly less abstract image right in the middle, and then with all these other details circulating around it. I'd say, I read about the 16th image, but in some ways I ended up as the plan or the panel being my #1 image, and the rest spinning out from it.
So what gave you the idea for this in the first place?
To be honest, Sue, because we had a slightly strange planning condition on our house, that I had to photograph the build and put the photographs in the public domain. And I took.
Why?
I think because we got permission under a so-called paragraph 55. That is because you can only get permission in the countryside because your house is special architecture, and it was the planners saying, well, prove it. So I proved it by putting 1,000 pictures in the public domain. And luckily we only lived 200 meters from the house. So I was up every day. And then as a spin-off from that, doing my duty, I was thinking I'd do a documentary panel about men at work or something like that. And I'd met Sue from going to advisories in the Southwest. And I showed her my would-be documentary panel, but she'd spotted these other photographs that I'd been putting on Instagram, I think it was, and said, well, those are fine art pictures. And I said, well, I never thought of myself as a fine art photographer. So she assured me I could be. And so I completely switched my mode and did a panel, the panel that you saw, or ended up with the panel that you saw.
So advice at an early stage made a massive difference.
Yes, to something, even though I put them in a Flickr album called Arty Photographs, I was sort of thinking, you know, arty, and not really thinking of myself as an arty photographer. So that was another.
You thought of fine art photography, arty in the past. It sounds like it. It's a fabulous house, and as I said, it's up for a design award, isn't it?
Yes, in fact, we just heard yesterday that it's shortlisted on the Design Awards for rural houses. And I think we're up against Costa Rica, Mexico, Australia, and somewhere else a long way away. We're the only one in Europe. So that'll be exciting.
Yeah, superb. So as well as being minimalist, what else is there about the house? Is it very green in the way it's...
Yes, that's counting a lot in these awards now. So it's energy positive and running cost negative. So we're a powerhouse in the bank as well as a house.
So what about your fellowship then, Nigel?
I'm thinking aloud. Yeah, at the moment. Oddly enough, my wife has done the landscape design and the planting of the house. And I've got, slightly to my surprise, in the last 2 or 3 years, very interested in flower and plant photography, partly because I've been locked into the garden. So that's a thought, but a very well-trodden path, I suspect.
Well, the best of luck, whatever you do, and congratulations once again on the house and on becoming an associate of the Royal Photographic Society. So thank you very much, Nigel, and thank you also to Sue Brown. Thank you very much. Okay, now, Nigel said it might have been documentary at one stage, but wasn't. But let's turn now to documentary. And this is a new distinctions panel for us. It's been going less than a year. And we started it because more and more people are tackling documentary work. People who want to look at a subject in detail and really create a body of work, which is something we'd like very much to encourage. And the chair of the documentary panel is Simon Leach, FRPS. Hello, Simon.
Good morning, Peter. How are you?
Fine. How's Southwest Wales?
Not too bad today. It's actually stopped raining slightly, so that's good.
Now, the word documentary,
yes.
It's used and abused. It's used, in fact, to describe almost everything from street photography to portraiture. So you're a professional photographer. What does it mean to you?
So, well, what it means to me is one thing, but for the RPS, it's photography which communicates a clear narrative through visual literacy. So it's something you're telling me.
So you've got to have an not important, but a clear message.
Definitely, definitely. It's not just about what you're photographing, and it's not even just about why you're photographing, but it's about what you want me, in inverted commas, the viewer, to take away from it. What do you want me to learn or to understand through your photography?
Now, of course, as we've heard, we have a statement of intent at associate level, but should it be fairly obvious anyway what the panel's about?
I think you should, and yeah, certainly, obviously, it's a photographic distinction. It's about the images. The images are telling you the story, but I think where the statement of intent is so important with documentary is it's an introduction. There are the variety of projects that we can see come through documentary are so diverse, and the authors, the photographers obviously need to understand that we, as the viewers, as the assessment panel, we may not understand fully to the in-depth knowledge they have of their subject. So explaining very briefly and very concisely what you're photographing, why you're photographing, but that important bit of what you are hoping to achieve, your aims and objectives, is really important. And also something perhaps of the photographer's intent. We don't want to know the challenges. We don't want to know what hurdles you've jumped through or what technical challenges you've had, but understanding that passion of why you keep returning, because documentary is something that's built up over time very often, and understanding the passion of why you keep coming back to this subject is really important, just to give us that hint and that introduction into a submission.
We have a lot of statements saying they're recording something, but of course there is a huge difference, isn't there, between recording something and documenting it?
Yes, very much so. Recording doesn't necessarily, it's good for history. There are places where it has obviously great value, but in terms of how the Royal Photographic Society has set up the distinction, it's very much looking for those documentary projects that are explaining something, that are communicating to the viewer and gaining interest, something that really grabs your attention and leads you into a project, and perhaps even gives you an insight into something that you had no interest in before. That's a real shiner as far as the documentary project goes.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Let's have a look now at the successful associate documentary panel, which comes from Brian Morgan, ARPS, and here's his statement of intent. These images, part of an ongoing project, were taken as I journeyed with a small traveling circus. They were shot during breaks in between performances, in the changing and warm-up area behind the circus ring, the space immediately outside the big top, and in the caravans lagered alongside. Caravans are symbolic of the impermanence of circus life. But grouped in this way, they also came to represent the strength of the circus family, whose bonds extend far beyond kith and kin. It was in these locations that the artists would rehearse, relax, and snatch a few moments with their children. I tried to impart visual meaning to these brief moments alongside the pre-performance tension and the post-performance fatigue which accompanied every show. Combined, these elements bring into stark relief the story of circus, a story of constant movement, hard work, ever-present danger, bound together by family and belonging. Well, Simon, there's an awful lot in that statement. Would you'd expect to see that reflected in these individual images now, wouldn't you?
Definitely, yes. It's a question of gaining an understanding what Brian's interested in. Interestingly as well, he's using images for screen as his submission. So this is a sequence plan, not a hanging plan. So the images and the narrative need to flow one from another. Effectively, communication. These first two images, you know, are practice images. The technicalities of it need to be not distracting. So the first image, we had dark trousers on a dark background, but you had that definition between the two. The second image, there is use of a blur vignette to bring the viewer's interest into that central point and that look on that girl's face that is the moment of interest. But it's used in a way that is not distracting from the narrative, and that's the key here. Whatever techniques you're using need to be appropriate to the subject matter to help you with that communication, and photographer intent in documentary is really, really important to understand your craft and use it in order to aid that communication. Another image, and this one's quite interesting because there's a bit of a transition here. Again, we're using the blur and the short depth of field to focus on the attention, but it's a quieter image and it leads from those practice images into the next set. And again, it's because of the sequence plan. We're not looking at hanging plan for prints. It's one image following another in images for screen. So we've moved from the practices into the home area. And obviously we know from the statement of intent that Brian's been really interested. He's obviously spent time with these people, really understood them, got to know that photographer, the individual understanding and vision of what he's trying to explain.
That's
this
a lovely
comes
image,
through
isn't
here.
it?
Yeah, both of these two actually, within the caravans, the intimacy that he has with this group of people really comes through this project. And then we're moving on now to another element of his statement of intent, the families that are around. Something that you don't see if you go to the big top and sit in the arena. You see the performance, but you don't see this in the background. And this is obviously somebody who's ready for performance or between practice or something. But, you know, there's the element of family there, young children around the place. And again, hints of what's going on in the background, the activity, but the use of depth of field and light to focus the viewer's attention on what's really important within the image and where the photographer wants us as viewers to look, the bits of information he's trying to impart. Lovely little portrait. Again, I mean, I don't know how old this child is, but it just speaks about the intimacy that Brian has gained with his subject and the time that he's spent in order to build up this project. And time, understanding, photographer vision, again, is so important within documentary projects. Moving now, again, another transitional period. So we're still talking about a relationship, people helping each other out and supporting each other. But you're moving from those family moments into something that's more around the performance, behind the scenes, preparation and practice and those kind of things. This image, just, it's not about favorite images, it's not about likes or dislikes, it's about whether you might meet the criteria. But obviously there are things in a good documentary project, an image will always stick with you, and that makes you remember the story. And for me, just the light, that curl of smoke, a habit that is socially less acceptable now within somebody that is obviously quite fit and practicing a set of aerobics that most of us would find impossible. And that contradiction between the two, I think, was a key image in just terms of personally grabbing me and wanting me to read more into the story. Quiet moments. He talks about, you know, those moments that surround the performance, trying to find your own space. There's something about this, about people who live in very close proximity in cramped conditions, working in a setting that is not particularly well built, and yet you have this quiet moment and this introspection of the performer before they go forward into the arena. Similar image again. And again, you know, you've got the bright light here, and some people might handle this differently, but it's not about how I would handle it, how you would handle it, Peter. It's about how this photographer has chosen to handle it. And you'll see there's very much a cohesion through the panel brought of this monochrome use in a fairly gritty way and a fairly contrasty way. But it also, particularly with this image, you can see the boards on the floor over the mud. You know, the environment is not clean, and therefore photographers enhance this with their use of a gritty, monochrome, contrasty style. And the whole thing just starts to tie together with this cohesion that we talk about within your criteria. So we're moving on to after the performance, obviously the makeup's starting to be taken away, and we've just got these few shots of individuals to finish off the panel that really kind of, again, it's that intimacy with the subject, getting in close and getting into those moments where nobody else would normally have access to as a general population, and introducing us to something that we wouldn't necessarily see in our day-to-day life. Very strong portrait. Again, slight vignette used, technique, it's a bit blurred there, a bit of short depth of field, but it really pulls you in, and that use of light, I mean, excellent scene from the photographer in lighting conditions that probably aren't that great. But he's not, you'll notice, put that into the statement of intent, he's not talked about the challenges of lighting or any of the situations he was in. He's focused on what he's doing, why he's doing it, and what he wants us to gain from that experience of viewing. Lovely portrait, and something that's talked about, actually, I wanted to pick up on is repetition. It does get talked about at advisories and assessments. You'll notice that this gentleman has appeared in the panel before, but it's a very different shot, very different communication. And so that breaks up, even though you are seeing the same person multiple times, it is possible to do that in a way that is different and really shows variation across the panel and doesn't lead to repetition. And finishing on a final portrait, the eyes almost closed, that weariness at the end of the performance that again came through the statement of intent, just finishing off in a lovely ending to a very successful and very well communicating plan.
So Simon, an unusual panel in many ways, and not something you could just knock off in a weekend.
Absolutely not. This is somebody who's spent time, who's had an intimate relationship, built up that access and that trust. And it, I think also, yes, slightly unusual, but it just shows the breadth. You know, documentary is such a wide church. We've had this, we're not viewing them today, but we've had panels that are purely landscape-based, purely environmental-based. You can, whatever your passion is, that's the thing about documentary. You've got a passion about it, you want to tell me something, you want to explain something. That's where your documentary project comes from.
And without building up that trust, you would not have been able to get some of those images, which, as you said, were really quite intimate.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And it's what gives this panel strength. It's really that concept of knowing that you've got that relationship and that you've got that access. And as he says in the statement of intent, he wants to show you not the performance, the lives behind the performance, that transience, that impermanence, the fact that from this group of people, their strength comes from the group, the relationships that they have and the family that they have around.
Would you say monochrome was important here to getting that sort of gritty look?
I think, you know, it's as I say, it's photographer intent. How do you want to communicate? And Brian's obviously picked this because he wants to communicate this fairly rough environment that hasn't had time to build up the kind of tidiness and organization that perhaps some of the rest of us expect, given that we have different careers, we're in the same place all the time and we can get ourselves organized. This is kind of thrown together. You get that feeling because of the grittiness of it. A different photographer would have had a different intent, different way of seeing this that they wanted to communicate. They may have used something else. Certainly for Brian's statement of intent and his aims and objectives, these things all tie together, and the gritty monochrome really works for his particular panel.
Okay, let's come off this now. So Simon, your next Distinctions assessment is on the 11th and 12th of November. So let's hope we get some interesting work there. And thank you very much for talking to us today. And we'll come back to you later in the program.
Great stuff. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, let's move now to another genre, which is contemporary, and meet the Deputy Chair of the Contemporary Panel, Richard Brayshaw, FRPS. Richard, how are you?
Fine, thanks, Peter. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Now, the age-old question, what is contemporary photography?
When the first answer is, how long have you got?
Long as you need.
I think in this case, the RPS have given us a definition, which is the one we work with. Communicates a visual realization of a stated argument, idea, or concept. So in our case, the contemporary panels tend to start with an idea, a thought, something not necessarily a huge thought, not some massive statement about our society, but something that people have a passion about and want to say something about. And so the thought comes first sometimes, probably most of the time, and then the photographers go out and look for ways in which they want to express that thought. And so I would translate that into the criteria in terms of the aim is that thought. The aim is that message that the concept you want to convey, something that you're passionate about, that you believe in. And then the objectives are the way in which you're going to photograph it. And the reason I say that is because people sometimes talk about trying to find a unique statement. What you want to say about society or the world we live in or something that's going on doesn't have to be unique. We get panels which can be very similar in the idea of the aim. But the objective, the way the photographer has chosen to convey that, will change according to the person and how they see the world. And so the objective becomes a mechanism for conveying your thought. And just to add to that in a sense, the thought tends to stay, but some people get very trapped in their statement. Having drafted something, they tend to then think, I've got to stick with that. Usually people stick with their idea, but the objective, the way in which that they will photograph might well evolve, because as you go out trying to find images which fit your idea, you may see different ones. So I guess I would say, don't be blinded by your statement. Give yourself that visual freedom to see different types of image, because you may find something which works better than your original idea.
And of course, it is all about images. Once
Yes.
you have the idea, it is about photography.
Yes, yes. Ultimately, it is about the photography. And in fact, I get the question, which is more important in contemporary, the statement or the images? And I answer that in two ways. One is a perfect statement will not get you a distinction. But a statement that the panel can't understand will make it very, very difficult for you to get a distinction. So the statement simply needs to be clear enough and show your point of view, show what you believe in, and then the images will speak to the rest of the process. And ultimately, as you say, it's a photographic image-based distinction, and that's what we're looking for. So
your advice would be not make the statement too complicated or too highfalutin, just say what the idea is.
Exactly. And have a bias in it, have your bias in it. We do see statements which try to be objective around the issue, but we're not really looking for objective. We don't want on the one hand and on the other hand. We want, this is what I think. And as has been said with some of the other panels, don't put stuff in which you don't show in the images. Because when we're assessing, what we are asking ourselves is, how does each image, as well as the overall panel, relate to the statement? And if there are things in the statement which don't appear, then we're asking why not? And if there are things going on in the images which aren't referenced in the statement, then we have the same question effectively. So keep it simple, keep it straightforward, keep it something you're really interested in, and then we can look at that as a basis for assessing the images, which, as you say, it is an image-based system.
You talked earlier about the panel being a mechanism, the images being a mechanism for your idea, but surely that could apply to various genres of photography.
Oh yes, yes. But I think in the case of contemporary, the idea sometimes can be more abstract. A lot of other genres, you see that the work is driven by something that somebody has been involved with or seen. I mean, for example, in the documentary one, that person was involved with the circus. Their message was about the experience of being in the circus. In a contemporary perspective, you might look at the role of the circus, because obviously there is huge debates around circuses and circus animals and the way circuses have evolved. And so you would look to a series of images, if you were taking the circus example, which could be I'm for it or I'm against it, because both of those would be valid aims to convey in terms of the distinction. We don't judge the idea in that sense. We don't have to agree or disagree, but that would give you a start point, and then you would look for your images to relate to whether you were for or against, and so you might show different aspects of that circus.
Is there ever a danger you're carried away with a concept which isn't quite matched in the photography?
Yes, certainly. I think at the end of the day, you have to be able to look at your panel and say, are these images strong? Are they visually appealing? Do they engage the viewer? And do they convey my idea? But if they don't meet the other criteria of a visual style, coherence, consistence, then they will, in terms of the distinction, they won't meet the criteria. But also from a viewer's point of view, you'll lose the viewer. If you don't have strong images, people won't be that interested to look at your work in order to get your message.
Okay, enough chat. Let's have a look at a panel now. This is a successful contemporary panel by Paul Schott, ARPS, and here is his statement of intent. By the way, in the contemporary genre, you're allowed to double the usual number of words in a statement, 300 instead of 150, to give you time to explain your concept. And this is called the emptiness of the Neue Heimat. Vienna, providing affordable housing for all. And Neue Heimat, says the author, is difficult to translate, but is roughly equivalent to new place to call home. And here's the statement. Vienna's effort to provide affordable housing for newcomers, wherever they are from, is commendable. The town council has been promoting new housing projects since World War I. The prize-winning architecture, over its lifespan, often given a new lease of life with patterns of coloured paint, fails to remedy the shortcomings of housing estates found in many of the world's big cities. They are filled with the emptiness of anonymity. These photographs are in part documentary, in part subjective. They consciously hold the middle ground between a realistic portrayal of modern Viennese architecture and a personal statement, a comment on a way of living where human occupation is only visible in minimalistic traces seen through windows or in balconies, and the surrounding spaces are mostly used by dog lovers to walk their dog or commuters to traverse to work, instead of facilitating intended play and development. The work strives to hold up a mirror, stimulate reflection. We should encourage town councils and architects worldwide to a new level of creativity, to establish future housing projects less barren and utilitarian, and come up with new ideas for living quarters in which humanity might better thrive and develop from a social perspective. To build housing we could all easily call home, and maybe, just maybe, resulting in people less estranged from their environment. So Richard, as we go through, a good statement?
Yes, a very good statement. And in fact, you could hear in that last sentence the belief of the photographer. You know, the passion about the role of architecture and creating places for us to live comes through very strongly in that statement. It also gives us the way in which the work is going to be carried out, the objective, by photographing these environments in a way with no people and no interaction with people, and in a very austere way. You notice the style of all these images is quite muted and austere. They don't tend to be much strong color. And this one, for example, you have a strong canyon-like effect, so you feel overcrowded and hemmed in, which relates very well to the statement. And again,
what about this one?
There's very little personality in the structures themselves. All you see is the old different curtain, but otherwise they're very uniform settings. And here, the seeing here is very clever, because you've got that uniform structure. You've got a half-dead plant by the door. You've got grass in the foreground, which is obviously not very well tended for. It's worn out. The concrete next to it is looking a bit sad and in need of some care. So all those small details contribute to what the statement is saying and the objectives that he's trying to achieve. And again, a feeling of sort of canyon and being overpowered by the structures, but also no people, nothing going on, very neglected in that sense, a world which, as I say, is quite austere and not very inviting. And here again, a different perspective on that not very inviting world. Nobody's using any of these things. They're obviously not that well cared for because there's dead leaves everywhere. And so you get another sense of what it might be like to live here. And here, a large amount of building, very well seen in relation to the reflections in the tarmac, but what you've got in front of it is just a large area of black tarmac, which tells you something about the living environment. Yes, and another completely deserted space with very little going on. And the same again, a different view. So there is no sense of repetition in the way these are photographed, are different with different aspects of this estate, but they all contribute to that same sense. And here again, not much personality, not much differentiation in any of these, but they're all photographed in a way which gives you a geometric sense, a sense of pattern and shape, which gives a consistency to the overall panel. Yes, we've got the only strong colour is the sign on the door, which would be saying don't come in this way. And here again, a different aspect. The facilities are all there, so we're learning about the estate as we go through the images. but clearly, again, not very well maintained. The grass is used quite cleverly again. A slightly muddy, trampled area is obviously not very well maintained. A different perspective, we have a tunnel going through into the rest of the estate, so we see beyond the first layer of houses, but again, what we see is just more of the same. There's no sense of space or view, and the use of reflection is clever because it enhances the sense of being surrounded by these uniform buildings. Yes, we've got more facilities which don't look as though they're used, and very little personality in the structures. There's the bicycle sticking up, which tells you something about the occupant. There's a few coloured baubles on the balconies, but otherwise it's a very uniform world.
The more you see this panel, Richard, the more you realise how thoughtful it is. It must have taken quite a long time to make sure there are no people, for example, and the little elements you picked out. You don't just do that by going snap, do you?
No, I think I would reinforce what Simon was saying. There's a lot of thought and work gone into this, and it would look as though there's great time spent on the estate to, as you say, make sure none of those things you don't want get in the way, and repeated visits. And so what we find is that, and probably with a lot of the genres, you end up with a large number of images, and how do you then pare them down? And one of the ways that we look in the contemporary is for each image, you ask yourself the question, how does this relate to my statement? How does this reinforce or amplify or add more to what I'm trying to say in my words? And you can see in the result of this, you have not only a stylistically consistent panel, but a combination of images which are all slightly subtly different in the way they've shown, but they all contribute to the statement.
Well, let's come off this now. That's a very good way of looking at it, actually. Why is this image in the panel? What does it add? And does it reflect what I've said in my statement?
Yeah.
Yes. So not every submission, sadly, can be successful. And we have one here from Peter Merry, LRPS, that unfortunately didn't make it. So if we look at this hanging plan, I will then read the statement of intent from Peter. London, it's called Surrounded by Beauty, a meditation on loneliness and art. London feels lonely and isolating to many who visit, work and live in the city. How we deal with those feelings is as individual as each of us. Accepting life as it is and looking for the beauty around us is just one approach, but one that works for me by reducing anxiety as I negotiate each day. Money dictates so much of London, but the joy of a beautiful image or artwork is not confined to the super rich. On the Old Kent Road, the Thomas à Becket pub has been transformed into a work of art, with complex collages and decorations to the external walls and window frames. This is inclusive work, made by locals, damaged by the elements, but publicly shared to bring joy to all. Glimpses of advertising hoarding, gallery posters and shop window reflections also offer unexpected beauty if we care to look. In Mayfair, galleries sell modern art to anyone who can afford it. Bright paintings, delicate porcelain and strange metallic sculptures reflect the wealth of the area, designed to be hidden away and seen in private, but for now available for all to enjoy. My panel highlights the loneliness and isolation which I and many others feel in the city. It supports this with visual delights which help raise my spirits. Regardless of who this beautiful art is produced by or for, it can be seen by those who choose to look and can ease our passage through every day. So Richard, let's have a look at the images. Colourful, unusual panel. Why didn't it get through?
Yes, there's a lot which meet the criteria in this panel, and the statement is clear, and it gives us a sense of relating loneliness and isolation to beauty. But then you come, to the first image, and the questions that I would have had looking at this are, well, where's the loneliness? You've got two people engrossed in talking to each other. So it's an interesting image and it's well seen, but there was a thought in the discussion that it doesn't actually relate to the words directly, which is one of those problematic images.
So words in a statement can obviously be a hostage to fortune.
Yes, exactly. And in fact, similarly with this one, it's a very interesting image. It's very well seen, but the look on that man's face tends to be saying, what on earth? Which is not what the statement is talking about. It's talking about being uplifted by beautiful objects. And what you have there is somebody that doesn't particularly look very uplifted. And yet you move on here to a beautiful object which reflects the city. So this is much more in line with the idea in the statement. And again, this is a clever image because it does fit with the statement. It shows the mundane, drab city, but also with a bright, it splits left to right almost. The left-hand side has got a very bright image of a girl, and the right-hand side is obviously the drab city. And the statement is good because it has defined art for us when it talks about the relationship of art and beauty. It defines art in this sense as things like posters and street art and murals. So we have an enhanced vision. We know what the photographer is looking for when he talks about art, and therefore we can look at it in relation to the panel. And again here, very interesting image. When you have to look at it twice to realize that there's something else going on because those are rivets, I think, or some strange objects. But a very interesting image which makes you think. And I think this one actually, we had a slight technical discussion because to us the figure didn't seem to be exactly in focus, and in this sense you would expect the figure to be the focal point of the image. So there were some concerns expressed about that. But here a very good image relating isolation to the big city environment, really. The one single head out of focus in the foreground says a lot about the relationship between the people and the place. And this is a very interesting, very clever image for the central image in the panel, because having talked in the statement about the role of money in creating this world we're looking at, here you have an image of money which is actually radiating from the center to all points of the rest of the panel. So very well seen and very interesting. And again, a very good way which meets the criteria of being visually interesting. Because you don't see the whole person, you get much more a sense of isolation and separation. And the fact there is only one person, again, gives you more of that sense of loneliness, which the statements talks about. And here again, another point of view on a dark night. The sense of loneliness could be enhanced by the fact there are lights glowing from the building. And then the person is picked out very cleverly with a light, so we can see that one person obviously in a hurry to be somewhere else. This one and the other image gave rise for discussion because the image at the other end of the bottom line was felt to be somewhat similar. So in this case, we weren't learning anything new. So there was concern about repetition because they're mirror images of each other, but they don't say anything separately or differently from each other. Yes, and this is an interesting image which summarizes loneliness and isolation. So it's an interesting way of showing us the city from a slightly different point of view, which still relates to the statement. you could almost look at this as art in reality. This conjures up, for those that aren't familiar with it, there's a sculpture series of figures, Anthony Gormley, on the beach somewhere in the northeast, I think. And here you have a series of figures shadowed, so you don't see the detail, but they create a sense of an art object, an art installation. This image caused some discussion because it wasn't clear how this related to the criteria. And obviously that's the question we're asking all the time. So how does this image reinforce the criteria that the statement has set out? And as I say, this is an image, a mirror. It's not exactly a mirror, but it's mirrored in the sense of it's very similar to the one at the other end of the line. Now, it's a good example of the challenges of paneling, because from a purely panel point of view, you could argue it's very interesting and clever to have mirror images at each end of the line. But what we were looking for is good paneling which reinforced the statement and new. So you can see there on the hanging plan how bottom left and bottom right they provide a symmetry, but in terms of the statement they don't add a great deal. So but the structure of the panel reinforced the statement, because the line of separation in the middle was a very interesting way of going about this. You know, you've got the loneliness and isolation splitting the two worlds of the visual interest to counteract that isolation which is shown in the middle line.
I suppose it's worth saying, when we talk about variety, we mean variety of approach, not necessarily subject matter.
Yes, yes, yes.
Well, let's come off to this now. It looks from and sounds from what you say as if Peter is not far off.
Yes, yes. As I say, there's a lot of things about that panel which meet all the requirements. So it's one where I would encourage the applicant to have or I encourage Peter to have a further go, because it's not that far away, and it does show a good way of relating statement to panel. It's just some of the images don't do it in enough detail.
Well, that's good news for Peter Merry, who can join us now. Hello, Peter.
Sorry, hello.
Hi, Peter.
Hi. Thank you for joining us. Now, you've had a detailed explanation there from Richard Brayshaw. What's your take on what he said?
Well, I thought it was really interesting, and part of the reason why I agreed to come and do this today was because I just felt so much confusion from the process, and felt a real desire to get a bit more of a feel of what you guys thought about it, which obviously is difficult for you to do in a couple of paragraphs when you get the letter. So my feeling is that it clarifies a lot of the things that I've been thinking about over the last couple of months since this didn't pass. And so I feel very much more encouraged. There are some points that I almost violently disagree with, but for the RPS, it's...
Peter, would you mind turning your video off, because then the quality of the line may improve?
Can I
Try again, Peter. Try again.
So, from where, or from the beginning?
No. Which bits do you violently disagree with?
Oh, where are we? I think the first couple of images, where you say that the people in the images don't support the statement of intent, and I feel that the statement of intent to me is very much saying we're looking at a contrast between the loneliness and the raising of the spirits and the joy that you get. So the fact that there are people that seem to be enjoying themselves in an image doesn't detract from it if they're in the colourful, joyful side. And it certainly isn't something that was picked up on the one-to-one. So that I feel strange about. Equally, the second one, having that person in there, doesn't. I can see that the person might not add greatly, but I certainly don't feel that they take away from. But it's, you know, we're to a degree we're playing a game, and we play by your rules.
Yes, but isn't this one of the things about contemporary photography? You know, everyone's got a different point of view, and you can interpret things in different ways, and that's just one of the things we have to get over.
Yeah, I think so, and but to a degree, I think when you go through the process of looking through the panel and putting it together, and then you go for your one-to-one and you go through the discussion and are encouraged, yes, go for it. To then have images, you know, I thought, oh yes, this is great. They get what I'm trying to do. To then be kicked back on images that were included in the one-to-one, I just found odd. But you know, everybody's different, and I do realise that. And you're right. It's my job to make it so obvious to you that you see that it doesn't matter that there are people in there, or I take the people out.
Yes. And I think I would say, actually, I think you're very brave. This is the most public one-to-one I've ever done. But also, it does perfectly illustrate that statement that we make about one-to-ones, which is it's an opinion of the person you're doing the one-to-one with. And obviously, the distinctions are based on a panel discussion and a vote. So there is an element of different panel members seeing things in a different way. So you can't, when we always say, you can't be sure that just because a panel member you're doing a one-to-one with is positive, that the other panel members will necessarily agree.
So there's no guarantee, but it really does sound overall as if Peter is well on the way, doesn't it, Richard?
Yes, yes.
Well, I hope you've not been discouraged, Peter. Are you intending to reapply?
Oh, absolutely, but I wouldn't have done up until today. What I was really looking for is trying to understand what isn't apparent in you know, the rejection letter. There's not enough space there or time for you guys to really explain it. Whereas I feel now, oh yes, I see what you mean. I understand what you mean. I can take those on board, even if it's like take the people out, because you know it's not difficult to get rid of people. Then and what have you. Interestingly, the one with the book ending on the last one was on the last row was certainly a concern that I had, and I spent a lot of time looking at other panels, trying to work out whether that kind of duplication was too much or not enough. So I'm not overall unhappy that it failed, and I can see the way forward, hopefully, to get it next time. And that's, you know, it's all just part of the process and the joy.
Excellent. Well, as Richard said, you've been extremely brave coming on. Thank you very much indeed, and I wish you all the best for the future. And thank you also to Richard Brayshaw. Very kindly. Thank you. Okay, we have two genres left, and we're going to do natural history now, which we describe as photography, which illustrates an element of the natural world within an unrestricted, uncultivated, and untamed environment. So, joining us again from Scotland, it seems, is Mick Durham, FRPS, who's acting chair of the panel. Hello, Nick. Hello, Mick.
Good morning.
Now, we had someone pick up on that definition, actually, on the word uncultivated. And they said, well, are you being pedantic or what? Because the whole environment's been tamed, in a sense. For example, fields first started to be enclosed in the 12th century. So how strict are you on this?
I think what we're trying to avoid is people submitting images that are obviously things like garden flowers that are very much cultivated. They are variations of the wildflowers. We're not saying that wildlife can't take place in a human environment by any means, and certainly in gardens. But what we are not looking for in this genre, for instance, would be a panel of garden flowers, because we feel that that doesn't really meet the criteria of our wildlife. But we do accept that wildlife and humans interact, and quite often the images that we see coming into the wildlife genre show that very interaction. And
presumably animals in zoos are not allowed, are they?
No, that's right. I mean, those are contained animals. Animals that are in any form of captivity would not be considered suitable. So yes, certainly zoo animals we wouldn't accept in the natural history genre.
Are there any other special guidelines for natural history?
Well, we talk about natural history. Of course, some people talk about nature and wildlife. They're really all the same thing. And what we're looking for at associate level, obviously, is a high level of photographic technique and a real understanding of the wildlife that people are photographing. So we are looking for a real interest in the subject matter rather than just a passing phase of photography. So panels that do really well, I think, highlight the fact that the person involved has maybe been a bird watcher all their life, or they're really particularly keen on say the world of insects, and that they have spent a lot of time out looking, watching, studying, reading books, so they really understand what they're doing. And that really comes through when you see the images. The good images show that whoever took the picture really understood what they were taking the picture of and why.
Okay, let's have a look at a successful associate panel now. And it's from Dean Robson, ARPS.
I just need to make the point that rural Scotland internet is causing a little bit of a problem. And when Simon has been going through the individual images, they've been coming up a bit slower for me than for other people. So if I'm not talking about one, it's because it hasn't loaded, and I apologise. No problem. It will get there, but it takes a bit of time.
All right, we'll have a pause after each one, but let's have a look at the hanging plan while I read the statement. It's called A Selection of Scottish Wildlife. This panel depicts an assortment of Scottish wildlife, from one of the largest, red deer, to one of the smallest, slime mould, many of which, though common, are under-recognised and underappreciated. All subjects are wild and free. Planning, preparation, captures, processing and printing, entirely my own work. I have used an assortment of lenses, including a macro lens, plus a Raynox macro adapter, to achieve a 3x magnification for the beech leaf bonnet and slime mould sporangia. And of course, we also ask at the moment for a species list to be provided, which we can see now. Mick, why do you want a species list?
What we're looking for, as I said, was somebody who really understands the subject matter that they are taking. And by providing a species list, maybe just the scientific name if there isn't a common name, or a common name but perhaps not a scientific name if it's difficult to be absolutely certain. But it does show a connection with the images that people are taking, and it shows that the photographer hasn't just gone out and thought, oh, that looks nice, I'll take a picture of it. They've actually got down on their hands and knees, looked at something, perhaps gone back, looked it up in the book, and there's that connection. They understand the world they're photographing, and obviously identification is part of that process of understanding.
Okay, let's have a look at the images now then. And quite a variety here, isn't there?
There certainly is. I mean, I know Jean lives in Scotland, and she's chosen to photograph Scottish wildlife, and of course we see quite a lot of Scottish wildlife featuring, and you get a variety of species. Jean's chosen to pick up on some that are perhaps not regularly photographed. Having said that, she starts with the biggest land mammal in Scotland, the red deer. It's a really good portrait. It's difficult sometimes to decide how much of an animal to put in if you don't want to include it all, but there's just sufficient back of the deer for us to understand its size. And it's pin sharp from tip of its nose to the back of the tines of the antler. And the background is diffuse, but it still tells us that that's a Scottish mountain with patches of snow lying there. They don't interrupt the picture, but they add to the story. Okay, now this is a common Quaker on willow. And here we've got absolutely stunning detail and beautiful work with the light and the dark. The whites are all captured beautifully. It's a very simple composition, just the stem that the moth is sitting on, the background just sufficiently blurred so that we don't get any interference, and what wonderful detail, and just a really interesting, and of course these are not big creatures, so they're not always easy to find, so a lovely image. So I'm still waiting, I'm afraid. Yeah, right, and a spider. Well, we either love them or hate them. Some people find spiders very difficult to cope with, but they are intriguing creatures when you look at them in detail and you look at their webs. And here we can see a garden spider in beautiful detail. What Jean's captured here, for those of us really interested in spiders, she's really picked up on the features that tell us this is a garden spider. That white cross on its body, one of the distinguishing features. And of course, she's really shown us the intricacy of the web, broken apart in places where perhaps previously a fly or something has landed. But here is a creature in its homemade environment, beautifully illustrated. I'm assuming the next one probably has come up. Yeah, here it is, the common frogs. Well, what an amazing picture. Frogs move into mating pools during the springtime, and she's got this absolutely perfect. There's a lot that's out of focus, but the foreground and the background still gives us that feeling of a pond, beautiful colours, and the four frogs all lined up absolutely in focus, and the reflections are in enough focus for us to see the detail. This is just, you know, natural history photography at its best, I think. It's showing us these beautiful creatures, the translucence of them. There's no burnt out highlights. It's a lovely image.
I must admit, it's probably my favourite in the panel.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's probably my favourite in the panel too. And you go from that to this simplicity. This is a beech leaf bonnet. I think this was one of the ones that she used a special lens to get the detail, because it's a tiny, tiny thing. That bit it's growing on is the stem of a single beech leaf. So I think that gives the perspective of size. But look at the quality of that translucent white. Not lovely, lovely detail. And again, a suitable background that really doesn't interfere and just allows us to see the detail of this sort of microscopic bit of Scottish wildlife. And again, this one, very different in a way, but similar. And this is the sort of, is it repetition, is it not? And of course it isn't repetition, because here we've got a real foreground of mosses giving us the detail. Bits of it are in focus and bits of it are out of focus, but we still know what it's about. And she's chosen a specimen with a raindrop sitting on it, which sort of magnifies the top of it. And that's a lovely little touch, which is so different to the other one, which makes it special. And I think this one did very well in a, I forget which competition it was, but this has obviously been admired by a number of people. Okay, a bird bird in flight, very difficult sometimes to catch, particularly small garden birds in flight. Lovely pin sharp head, beak, even the wings are sharp enough. Obviously, there's movement in the bird because it's flying, which is fine. And again, a very complementary background, choosing to photograph birds in flight where you've got a background that suits the colours of the bird. That's a clever touch and works well. Okay, damselfly and spider on possibly an iris leaf or what have you. We see lots of images of, well, we've seen one of Jean's of spider and damselfly, but not very often together. And Jean has managed to get both of them sharp. They're both interesting, doing slightly different things. And we've got this lovely geometric pattern of the leaves that they're sitting on, and again a background that isn't spoiling any of the detail for us. Now, black backgrounds don't always work for wildlife unless it's a nighttime image. Sometimes they can sort of detract, but here this lacewing emerging from its case, it just excuse me, it does just work because the black allows the detail to come through, and it's a very, very delicate detail in the shed case and the wings drying. Again, a very, very clever capture. Snails, the gardener's delight. And again, a geometric image. You've got this beautiful curl of the shell and the snail going up the stem. Can't see all of the second antennae. That doesn't matter to me because it's clinging on. And for me, that iris or leaf or whatever leaf it is on the right-hand side, I think that makes it. It just puts something into perspective. And it's a different viewpoint because we're looking really up underneath the snail. We're not looking down on top of it. And we can see the sort of slow intent of the snail going up the stem. Works perfectly. A small insect, I forget what this one is, a brown-lipped snail, not one I know, but again, that lovely detail with just those 2 or 3 water droplets on the stem and a second stem, just putting it into perspective, and superb detail. I suspect this has probably been focus stacked. You've got to choose your subject that's not moving if that's what you're going to do. Maybe it hasn't been, but we've got tremendous detail, and what an interesting creature to be able to see and look at. Now this for me exemplifies fungi photography. Jean has put the fungi in context again. We've got a beautiful sharp foreground, 2 leaves and some moss. Then a piece of fungi, it's a common russkill, and it's sharp from front to back, absolutely. It's beautifully lit. You've got that lovely light shining through, and then nothing in the background. There could have been distracting trees or twigs or other things, and she's made sure that that isn't the case so that we can really concentrate on this fungi sitting where it's growing. Lovely. A second bird in flight, a coal tit, another garden bird, and again, not really repetition, partly because it's a different species, but partly because she's got it in a completely different aspect. Here, we're looking up underneath, we can see its claws, we can see the spread of wings. Again, the bits that need to be sharp, the head, the eye, and the claws are sharp, and the wings and the tail, which are moving as part of flight, for me, suitably out of focus, just showing that movement, showing us that this is not a static image. Again, well done. Now this one of the tiniest images. This is some of the slime molds which needed the special lenses. I can't remember how tiny these are, but they are microscopic. But by going in with the specialist lens, we can see detail that we perhaps would just never see with the naked eye. It's a simple portrait really of 3 of these things, but we see them in slightly different attitudes, and we can really see, again, it's that translucent, slimy quality to the image. We can see that, yes, these are slime molds. And again, there's nothing to detract from us looking at what Jean has wanted us to look at. Sorry, it hasn't loaded the final one. There it is. And what a lovely way to finish. This is a peach blossom moth, and you can see why it's called a peach blossom with the coloration. And what's lovely here is that the moth and the twig are very, very similar. And this, of course, is disguise, but yet we can see every outline of the moth, and we can see all the detail. We can see how it's clinging there. A lovely simple composition with a really nice twig running up through the image. A beautiful way to finish the panel. And so we've seen a whole host of different Scottish wildlife, very much concentrating on the small and the unusual, well, the things that we don't see, but then a little reminder that wildlife isn't just about those things, and we've got from the big red deer right the way down through.
Lovely. Let's come off that now and say thank you so much to Jean Robson for that lovely panel, and thank you to Mick Durham as well. Thank you,
My
Mick.
pleasure.
And now the final genre, which is travel, described as photography which communicates a sense of place. And now we're joined by the chair of the travel panel, Hazel Mason, FRPS. Hello, Hazel.
Hi, Peter. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having us here.
Lovely to have you here, and I hope you're going to guide us through the choppy waters of exactly what is travel photography. Sense of place, not very precise, but is that deliberate?
I think it actually is deliberate, Peter, because what we're asking here is it can be a very wide subject, and what we're wanting people to do is think what a sense of place actually means to them. There's 15 images for the photographer to convey that aim, basically as a narrative, telling us the stories of their subject, their aims, so that we get a real feel, a real sense of that place, that we can sense the emotion, we can perhaps feel the heat or the cold or smell the foods, giving us a real picture that we feel that we're there, that we can understand what that subject's about. The RPS describe it that it may depict a region, a journey, a land, a community, or a way of life. And so what the photographer can do is a panel basically landscape-based or seascape-based, people-based, documentary type approach, a panel based on the architecture, or panels based on specific events like festivals. But what's important is to communicate, as we've heard so often today, the visual awareness, the passion, and hopefully a photographer beginning to develop a bit of a style and a knowledge of that subject.
So it's wide open.
It's wide open.
Have a look at a panel now. A successful one comes from Checky Lam, ARPS. And here's a statement of intent. The Kazakh nomads graze livestock in Western Mongolia. They are probably the only people in the world who hunt with eagles. Grasslands are probably the only land that can be cultivated in Mongolia. The Kazakh nomadic Mongolians have lived and learned skills since childhood. They hunt with eagles, they train together, they inherit the hunting skills and hopes of their predecessors. During the Golden Eagle Festival, hunters demonstrate the skills they've learned. The game is to test their speed, accuracy and agility. Besides the eagle test, there are traditional races. Shall we go through the images one by one then, as I'm talking? And as well as horse racing, there's camel racing, the sheepskin scramble, the golden eagle game. They've all become a manifestation of the strength and art of the Kazakhs. Nomads have lived a life close to nature for centuries, and it really is one of the natural paradises of the world. So, Hazel, a lot of action here, powerful panel.
Yes, it certainly is, and it's certainly a cohesive body of work from one photographer. What you can see with the first few images is very much those scene settings of the Kazakhs and the nomads. The photographer spoke about the children and the eagles, and this photograph takes us back into that, to the children and their relationship with the eagle. This is showing the men going off to the hunting, and the photographer here has made great use of backlighting, catching the expression on these faces, the going through the rivers, telling us a bit about the grasslands of Mongolia, the fact that it's cold, the fact they're wearing what they're doing, and it takes them up to the mountains. Again, a scene setting type image, telling us that it's high altitude, the grasslands are there in the valley below. And this is a group of likely family members about to set their eagles off to hunt.
I should say, by the way, we're going to have questions and answers very, very shortly with all the panel chairs. So if you'd like to ask a question, please type it into the chat bubble at the bottom of the screen. We don't want comments, really, thank you, just questions, and pithy ones if you can as well. So Hazel, how important is a theme in travel?
I think it has to meet the statement. It has to meet the objectives and the aims that are written in the statement, and then sit together as a body of work. The theme can be wide, as we've just talked about. It can be like a festival, which is narrow. It can be a place, a country, a civilization, but it's making sure that the images fit that statement. And obviously, if you have a very wide, for example, geographical area, it can sometimes be difficult for the statement and the aims, for the photographs then to meet those aims that the photographer is trying to show. Here, the photographer has used quite a tight statement, showing us about a festival and the Kazakh nomads in Mongolia. And by using a tight statement and a tight subject, he's enabled us to really feel that we're at that festival and giving us a real sense of that place, which is what travel is all about.
If you're going on holiday for 2 weeks, then you're unlikely to come back with an associate panel.
I think that's an interesting question, because you can never say never. And I think people do successfully come back with a travel panel after a trip away. But I think what's important, as with all the genres, is understanding the subject, having the visual awareness, the aims beforehand, having an idea of what that community is about. I think to go somewhere for the first time and perhaps not know what to expect, and then to try and understand the lighting or the people, it's setting yourself a very hard challenge. I think the panels that are perhaps the stronger ones are the ones where people have really immersed themselves in that culture, they've got, or that place, they've got to know it, they've used more challenging lighting, for example, they've put their individual stamp on somewhere rather than the stereotypical type image. Okay, let's come off that now, because we are beginning to run out of time. We do want the question and answer session, so thank you to Checky Lamb for that panel. Thank you to Hazel, very much indeed. And now is the time for questions. So if you'd like to type them into the chat bubble. The first one is for, and all the chairs, if you could switch your video on, please. So you're ready, all the chairs, and also Ben Fox, are you with us? And Andy Moore. So hopefully we'll have a cast of thousands to answer your questions. First one is for Mick Durham, Natural History. Can you have an entire panel with black backgrounds?
That's an interesting question. I guess you could. It would very much depend on the subject matter. Obviously, I'm guessing somebody's either thinking of nighttime photography or perhaps photography deep in a rainforest where it is very dark. It's got to, the trick is that the rest of the image, the bit that isn't black, has got to have interest and variety, and the black mustn't dominate what we're seeing. So without seeing particular examples, that's a tricky one, but it would not be impossible. We would certainly not discount it.
Okay, thank you. Next one is for Richard Brayshaw. In fact, no, it's for Simon Leach, because the question is, that contemporary panel we saw, could that go into the applied genre? The one from London?
That would be for, if it's applied, then it would be for Trevor.
No, but what they're saying is, could the subject matter go into the applied genre? Is there a crossover?
There's certainly crossovers. I'm confused, Peter. Which panel are we talking about? The contemporary panel or the documentary?
could the contemporary panel we saw go into the applied genre?
Difficult to say. I mean, there's crossover between all the genre, but it really comes down to the statement of intent and where your aims and objectives are. Certainly to get into the applied, you need that end purpose. And therefore, that would come through in the statement of intent, how that's written and how that's then photographed and communicated through the images.
One definitely for you, Simon. What about street art? Is that allowed?
Street art's a really difficult one because, well, for a couple of reasons, really. A, of course, with anything that's street art, it's still subject to copyright, and so you should still be getting permission to use that image. I know we're not talking about commercial purpose, but it's a good habit to get into, to know what you are and aren't allowed to photograph without the permission of the original artist. The other thing is that it's difficult to show photographer intent and individual vision. If you are just photographing the art itself, it turns into a bit of a flat copy, in effect. And I have seen work like that. And there's not really any input from the photographer. And of course, one of the criteria is the photographer's individual vision and understanding. And so it's a difficult subject in which to explore and really achieve the level that's required under that criteria. But
it can be done, but you need your own take on the image.
It can be done. It has been done, but you definitely need your own take, and you should be getting permission from the artist that created the original work.
Let's bring in, thank you, bring in Simon Verco, if you're there, Simon. This question is, the one-to-one portfolio review, where you share a screen via Zoom, how much is it?
Okay, yeah, so the one-to-one portfolios, it's £25 for non-members and £20 for members. And that gets you a 40-minute one-to-one conversation with an appropriate panel member.
Okay, thank you. Andy, if you have an exemption for an MA, what distinction do you have? You're muted, by the way, at the moment.
I've kept some
an MA, what does that give you with an exemption?
That would be the same level as applying for an associate. So we just need a copy of the certificate and an exemption application form, as long as it's within the last 5 years.
And then it's automatic.
Then it's automatic, absolutely. So you can just send that through to distinctions@rps.org, and all the details are on the website as well. Very, very straightforward to apply. Just a copy of your MA and the exemption form, and that's it.
Fine. Ben Fox, let's bring you in. What are the print sizes that we allow?
Okay, for print sizes, we've got, well, to be honest, the world is your oyster if you give us enough notice. What we have got is restrictions regarding the physical space that we can present your work. As many of us know, we've got 3 rails to place those images on, and the only physical restriction between for the prints is the dimension between the rails, which is 23 inches. But you could do 6 foot by 20 inches prints. We've got that space, so there really is a lot of flexibility.
Well, it's nice to see the RPS auditorium in RPS House, even though you're the only one in it. I suppose we should also say you can apply for a distinction via exhibition, in which case the images can be as large as you like. It can be an installation as well. And it doesn't have to be an RPS house either. It could be in your own home, it could be in a cafe or whatever. Let's ask Trevor Yerbury, what do you think the best genre is for portraits?
It depends on the use, Peter. I mean, obviously applied would be a good one for portraiture, but I mean, portraiture could run into documentary, so that would be Simon's department, because you know, a series of portraits of street people would run in well into a documentary panel. So portraits can cover a wide range of categories. Personally, I would like to see a portrait category.
Here's a question. How long is it best to wait after getting your licentiate before you go for your associate? Who would like to answer that one?
I think there's a bit where it's how long's a piece of string. There's really no set guidance on that. Some people are able to turn around a licentiate, associate and fellowship possibly in the same year.
What about Hazel? You're on the licentiate panel and you're on the travel panel, that's L and A. What's your own advice? Would it be for people not to rush?
I certainly agree with Ben that some people can go pretty well straight from licentiate to associate because they're looking at different things. With the licentiate, we're looking very much at technique and variety within that, whereas at associateship, it's a body of work with a statement. I mean, obviously at associateship, there is the expectation that there is good field craft, good camera craft, good technique, good visual awareness, all the things that we would normally see at licentiate. But I think the question is rush. I think people shouldn't rush. No, I think the most important thing in going through this journey is not to rush, not to just have the aim of getting a panel, but to enjoy the photography, particularly when it's a body of work for associateship or fellowship, to have a passion and work on a project rather than necessarily the sole aim of a distinction.
Peter, can I just add to that? I think that's absolutely right what Hazel said. I think when people get the licentiate, they should use their skills in gaining the licentiate, then to use that for associate. My experience is that you need to enjoy the L, you need to enjoy your photography, and then slowly work on a project that really is something that you're very passionate about. And I think that's been shown throughout all the examples. One thing that runs through all of them is the passion shown by the photographer. So I do think it's important to wait. As Ben said quite rightly, we do see some people that can literally go from an L and then apply immediately for an associate. But as I always say, it's better to be a successful licentiate than a failed associate. So it is a journey. Take your time, enjoy your photography. It's not a race, and get those skills needed to apply yourself for a project.
Thank you, Andy. Last question. A lot of people interested in this. How do we assess prints during COVID restrictions? If the assessors are looking at digital images on their home computer screens, how can it be called a print assessment?
Yeah, this is a great question. Paul Mitchell did a great Facebook post on the Distinctions Facebook group, which really explains how the process works and how we assess for the natural history. The two challenges we had, that first of all, we had to keep the safety of the volunteers. That is absolutely paramount. As you see today, most panel members are in Scotland. So we had the challenge, we can't start bringing and asking chairs to come down to RPS Bristol. We think that would not be a reasonable way to approach it. And also we had to have integrity in the assessment process. So what we've come up with is we've asked a print expert, the gentleman's called Paul Mitchell, and also a gentleman called Ray Spence, but there's many others we can use, many here that have got their videos on. All are experts in the quality of the prints that's needed. So we've asked applicants to send in their prints, and Paul Mitchell will actually look at the prints here at HQ, and he will advise the people, the other panel members that are connecting us via Zoom, the sort of print quality and the presentation. Paul doesn't have a vote. He will only advise and answer any questions that the panel have. And then one thing that's really important, even though the panel are via Zoom and they've got the images digitally, and primarily they are looking at the content, but that doesn't detract from they are looking at the technical issues as well. And they can ask Paul any questions if they've got any concerns they've seen on the digital images for Paul to actually have a look at. And the good news is, from my point of view, and the DC and all the chairs, it's important that we maintain the standards. And I am 100% believe that the decisions will be made that will be correct. If you're awarded a distinction, you deserve it. And unfortunately, if you're not recommended, that is the reasons you haven't fulfilled the criteria. And that will not make any difference to the process that we've got in. We might get there slightly differently, but the decisions, as we found out in natural history, are the right decisions. And we work extremely hard to make sure that is correct. So that's a brief, but if you get a chance, go onto the Facebook group and look at the Paul Mitchell, his explanation as part of that process and how it worked.
Thanks very much, Andy. And we should say, if it wasn't for this process, people who want to submit prints would have to wait until next year. So we're
to be honest with you, Peter, the way it's going, and anybody seeing the R number, it's jumping all over the place. And even locally to Bristol, we've had a school that's had to go in lockdown. So realistically, I think it's going to be probably autumn 2021 before we go back, and hopefully we'll, instead of looking at all these panel members and chairs via Zoom, we'll actually see them here in Bristol. But I think for the spring session, it's going to be very much the same. But again, unless they come up with a vaccine over Christmas, which we all hope they do, I think it's going to be very similar for the spring.
Just fit in one quick question, which I can answer, which is, can I go in for directly for an associate? Yes, you can. LAF, go in for whichever level you like, but take advice first to make sure you are at the right level. Well, that's all we have time for, I'm afraid. I'd like to thank everyone for taking part in the roadshow, all the chairs, all the applicants, Andy Moore, Ben Fox, Simon Verco, who's been handling all the technical side. Been very kind of you to be with us for this session. We hope everyone's enjoyed it. And next Tuesday, the 15th of September, we tackle fellowship. Same times, 11 and 1900 BST. Once again, we'll be showing you some brilliant work and talking to panel chairs and applicants, this time about the highest level of distinction. And do join us if you can. Meanwhile, our Facebook page is packed with information and advice, as Andy says, and it's open to both members and non-members of the RPS. But for now, that's it from all of us here. Goodbye.